Welcome, everyone, to the Learn Tourism Talks webinar. I am so excited to be here for another month. So thank you so much again for being here. Today, we're going to be talking about what if you're solving the wrong problem, design thinking for tourism and hospitality. And this is a topic that I am extremely excited to share because it's one of my nerdy passions. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah Benoit. I'm the lead instructor at Learn Tourism. We're an educational nonprofit that works specifically in the tourism and travel space. And I'm really glad to see some folks that I already know and come regularly to my webinars, and to have some new folks joining us today. The other thing I wanted to share, and this is new just for all of you, we have not quite announced this to the public yet, but we have a virtual workshop coming up in November. It is going to be hosted on Zoom. I am putting the landing page where you can learn more about the curriculum for that day. I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about stewardship first, responsible tourism in action. And we've got some great classes for a half-day workshop that'll happen from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern. So that's 7 to noon Pacific. But if you'd like to join us, learn more about how to train your community members, storytelling for impact, how to create customer experience with stewardship as your foundation, we're going to have an awesome day learning together. And also for those of you that have been to our Learn Tourism Conference, which happened in March of this year, which was formerly known as the DIY Tourism Conference, we have set our dates for 2027, and they are Sunday, November 7th to Tuesday, November 9th. So save the date. The conference is also something that I'm deeply passionate about. We've been doing it for 10 years. We will be hosting it in Richmond, Virginia again in 2027. And for those of you who don't know, we have been in March the last couple years, mostly because of Hurricane Helene and how it impacted me in particular in 2024. But we are going back to our original dates in November, so I'm really excited about that. But again, we're here today to talk about design thinking. And not only is this one of my really nerdy passions, but this topic I think has such value from the perspective that we are living in this world that is changing very fast. And we are having to adapt, pivot, evolve, whatever word you want to use, in a lot of different ways, especially over the last few years. And design thinking is something for me that has really helped me cultivate inside of my own brain and mind a way of approaching things that is less stressful, more productive, and helps me actually get to the heart of an issue more quickly. This is also something I think can work really well with teams when everyone starts to have this perspective. It just allows you to approach any type of shift in a way that feels sometimes more exciting and more purposeful. And I think the reason it's more purposeful is because it's centered around intention and people. So design thinking really helps us be more proactive rather than reactive, to know what our intentions are and to create everything from that sort of foundation. And the other part of the foundation is just the human experience. And we really want to connect with our visitors, our customers, our local community. We want to have a deep understanding of them. And that relationship that we build over time should allow us, like I said, to make decisions and to take action in an easier, more powerful way, right? And I think all of us can use that in multiple parts of our lives. So I think the challenge really for me was realizing that I'm not always identifying the heart of the issue, right? So that's where digging into this topic. And I came to the topic of design thinking through the concept of rapid prototyping, which I learned from an engineer. And so to me, I am not an engineer and I'm not a graphic designer, but thinking like these folks and using the skills that they cultivate in order to be more creative really helped me figure out that big step that gets missed, I think, in our process is often what is at the heart of the issue? What is the real problem, right? There's lots of things on top of that problem that we have to remove. So as organizations and brands, we really just want to shift our mindset to say we don't want to jump straight to things with assumptions involved, right? Again, not all of our customers, visitors, locals are going to think like we do, right? They're going to have different personalities, different backgrounds, different experiences. It's also, I think, typical for a lot of us to be so busy that we tend to react instead of putting an approach together that is more, I would say, scientific in some ways, but it creates a space of testing, right? So we can figure out things as we go along, learn while we're doing. And even though sometimes it feels hard to stop and take that moment, the truth is, when you are a really busy person with a lot of things on your plate, being able to learn while you're doing it is incredibly important. So having a real structure around how we do that is really valuable. And then again, like part of having a lot of assumptions, I think includes confusing symptoms of a problem with the actual core of the problem. Or, like I said, those things that sit on top of an issue, addressing those, but it never seems to get us where we need to go because we're not really at the root of it. So that's where design thinking is so valuable. And like I said, rapid prototyping is another concept I'll just throw in there. I think is extremely valuable, especially if you're in marketing and promotions and visitor experience, because both of these skills allow you to just be in the moment and to feel like you have a plan when things are unexpected or having problems, right? I think at the end of the day, everything that we're talking about, no matter which sort of language we put around it, because I'm going to explain at the end how you can continue your journey around changing your mindset in this way and sort of creating different frameworks for yourself. But all of it focuses around empathy, curiosity, experimentation, collaboration, and iteration. And for those of you who know me, you know that when I'm teaching marketing, I often talk about the fact that marketing is not a race. We're never going to cross the finish line, right? Marketing is something we're just going to keep doing. There's not really an end in sight because at the end of the day, it's a relationship. So if the relationship ends, it means the relationship is over for some reason. In marketing, that's not what we want. We want the relationships to continue. We want them to strengthen. We want them to deepen. We want them to lead to other relationships. So this is really about perceiving it that way and not always having that kind of agenda that we attach to things where we think we're going to get a gold medal when we cross the line. You have to shift your way of thinking in order to really enjoy marketing, I think, right? Because if you're waiting for that prize at the end, it doesn't always come in the way that you expect. I want to give a shout out to the people that are really the grandfathers and the leaders of design thinking, and that's IDEO. They are the ones that really came up with a lot of the trainings on this subject. They have great free content you can read. They are globally recognized for their work in this world. And so, again, at the end, I'll provide some resources so you can continue to expand your way of thinking and your mindset and your frameworks. But I think you'll find that IDEO is an amazing group to follow and to just have on your radar, especially when it comes to, like I said, being agile in your work and reducing stress so that we're able to have fun and build connections and not always feel the pressure of things changing. Because again, I think the changes we're experiencing now are just going to be ramping up for the rest of the year and into the future. So, at the end of the day, why are we going to talk about this? I think it's because we want to learn how to listen before we fix things. We want to test before we invest all of our resources or budget or time. We want to design with people and not for them. And I think that's very key, right? So, that's something I learned being in social media. We're always designing while we're with the people, right? We're getting their feedback in the moment. We're seeing what they like and don't like. So it's not about being separate from them, it's about being connected to them. And then improving experiences continuously. So I think we all already know that there's always room for things to be better. There's always another way to innovate. And great experiences don't just happen accidentally, they don't happen on their own. It's because we put intention into the process and we say, this is what we want to give people. And so when we continue to work on that, we continue to expand it, we're guaranteed to see results over time. So that's an overview of design thinking. Now I want to talk about some examples of the framework, and then we're going to dig into doing the framework. So start thinking about problems you need to solve or issues that you're confronting, because I want to use somebody as an example later. But let's just take a look at some very basic examples, right, of how this can be applied. So one is overnight visitors. Let's say the issue is we need more overnight visitors in our community. One of the common assumptions is that if you advertise more, people are going to stay longer. If you advertise more, people are just going to do what you want, right? And I wish it was that simple. For those of you that have done advertising, you know that is not how it works. There's a lot that goes into the process of creating campaigns and developing them and getting them live on the technology, then watching the data and things like that. So the first step is really how can we challenge the assumption, right? So that's almost the immediate beginning, I think, of any design thought process. What is the issue, right? What do we think the answer is? Now let's completely question that, right? So, what are visitors actually experiencing? This is a little sort of framework I use: think, feel, need. What is it that they're thinking about when it comes to this issue? What questions do we think they have, right? What is it that we think that stops them from saying yes to staying longer? How do they feel, right? So, having a thought about something and feeling it, they are related, but they are different things. So, what do we think is stopping people from staying longer when it comes to their emotional situation, right? It's important, I think, to thread together their thoughts and perceptions with how they might feel. These things can be related, but they might also indicate slightly different things, right? So it's going to help you in the problem solving process. And then, just from a very basic utilitarian space, what do people need, right, in order to decide to stay longer? So, again, you can take this process, and if you study design thinking, it's going to be much more robust and complicated. But I am reducing things down to a framework I think we can execute in a faster way. Again, as you study these things, you can expand upon them and take more time. But I think these three things are the key part of putting yourself into a more empathetic state, right? So that we can stop trying to solve the problem from our perspective and try to solve the problem from the perspective of the people that we want to serve. The next step is then reframing the problem, right? So we've identified the problem, we've thought about maybe what needs to happen, but then we've challenged our assumptions and the way that we're perceiving it. And in that challenge, we then want to reframe the problem itself, right? So it's not that the visitors are not staying long enough or that we need more visitors for overnight stays. It's that really the visitors are not seeing enough value to extending the trip. The experience doesn't feel cohesive to people. So maybe we're not presenting a cohesive 2 day or 3 day experience, or travelers don't have a personal or emotional reason to stay. So they're not feeling connected to the story, right? So now we want to, again, we're still in a phase where in some ways we're trying to step into the shoes of people, right? And come up with an idea of what's hindering them. But at the same time, we can then go back to different things and confirm whether or not we're right. So we're going to start building small experiments, right? So I think in this process between these two things, we're basically reframing the problem and building our experiments. What we want to think about is, have we heard things, right? Is there things in our social media we can relate to? Are there reviews that we've read? Maybe we haven't done surveys and all of that, but is there any feedback we can glean from our online presence, right? To reinforce what the issues might actually be, right? And so as we're doing that process, we're then going to start to build out different ideas for how we can entice people to stay overnight more frequently. So this could be coming up with different itineraries, like a romantic weekend or a wellness focused itinerary. It could be featuring a trail or even building out a new kind of trail experience where we highlight different places people can go. We could actually build out, maybe we have some anchor attractions in our area, or I have some specific products or services that are really what everybody knows us for. But there's some specialty things or some hidden gems in our community that we can pull together to build out a bigger vision, right? And the reason we're going to prototype multiple ideas pretty quickly is because we don't necessarily want to just focus on getting one perfect idea. We want to come up with, let's say, I usually stick in the 3 to 5 range, but I immediately want to start generating ideas for how we can talk about staying overnight, bring people into the fold on this, and quickly put out a few different things that will maybe tap into different emotional needs, different niche feelings, whatever it is. So, how can we come up with a few ideas we're going to put out there? And then what we're going to do is basically watch and see what happens and learn from that, right? So, to me, that's why we don't want just one idea. We want a handful of ideas. And that's part of the rapid prototyping of this process, right? Is that we don't spend too much time on one thing. We quickly come up with lots of different things based on our kind of think, feel, need components. And then we go out and we actually start promoting this, right? So whether that's through social media, whether it's through an email marketing campaign, whether it's through advertising, whatever it is, we can start to change up the language, change up the imagery, change up our presentations, and then see what starts to bring in the attention, right? So there's any number of metrics or data you can watch depending on how you are implementing this. And then when we've gathered even just a little bit of that data and metrics, we're going to start to refine what we're doing. So again, we might see conversations on social media. We might see more people clicking on a particular type of itinerary. Whatever it is, we're going to start to pay attention to that and respond to it. Right. And so that's where we might add more content around a certain type of itinerary. We might continue to talk about a specific feeling that we know people related to. It caused them to be attracted more to a piece of content. Right. So we're going to continue this process. It's not going to end here. We're going to keep using the same process and going forward to refine and adapt until we're really getting the results that we want, right? So we really see overnight stays increasing. The second example I want to give of this is, let's say you have low engagement, right? So not a lot of people, not enough people are engaging with your marketing, or you're seeing that going down. A lot of times a common assumption there would be we need to post more content. Many of you know I'm a big believer that posting more content does not help your engagement, right? As a matter of fact, if it's not done correctly, it'll hurt your engagement. So we really want to, again, challenge those assumptions and figure out what are visitors actually experiencing, right? So what are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they needing? Is there something that is happening when they see our content that makes them scroll by, right? What do we think those things are that are causing them not to feel connected, right? Or not to stop and comment or connect in a deeper way than just being reached. We want them to go to that next level of engagement. And are there things in our content that we're maybe not providing, right? Maybe we can go back and look at our data and say, we know people are engaging a lot of times with our event content. We need that content. However, we're not talking about these other things, and maybe we should start to include that in the strategy. So just again, challenging those assumptions. And then reframing the problem, right? So, what do we think the problems really are? What do we think is actually causing the lack of engagement, right? There's not an emotional connection. We're not talking enough about experiences, right? We're focusing too much on ourselves and not on what the audience is looking for, or they just don't relate to it in some way. How can we become more relatable? Building small experiments again involves really developing content in a different way. So just reevaluating, maybe we need to focus on more local people and behind the scenes stuff. Maybe we need to change up our visuals, right? Maybe there's something about the visual that isn't capturing people in a way. Or maybe it's the language, it's the emotional hooks, right? So how can we adapt some of those things in response to the problems that we think are actually occurring? Then again, we're going to observe the behavior. We're going to see if the changes we've made are increasing engagement in any way. We're going to try to identify where we see that happening. You might even highlight different parts of your engagement and give those different parts of engagement different value, right? So comments to me often have more value than, let's say, just a reaction, right? Saves and shares again might have more value than watch time, depending on what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. And then we're going to adapt and improve, right? So we're going to look at what starts to resonate with people, where we see engagement going up. We're going to refine what's still not working, and we're going to continue testing and listening to people. So these are just some examples of how we can take a problem, start quickly digging into that problem, get out of our own mindset, get into the mindset of the humans that we actually want to connect with, and then start to put together a process of actually taking action, right? And taking action in a way that I think reflects, again, our intentions by putting data and metrics and observation in that mix. We really say, this is what we need to see to feel like we're correcting the issue. And so that's where I think this short process, even though, again, you can expand this into a much larger, more in depth process, I think it's important sometimes in the moment to have kind of this condensed way of looking at things so that you just don't put a lot of energy into solving a problem and then get no results out of it, right? So hopefully this avoids that time expenditure and helps move you directly into something more structured that's helpful. So this is where I want all of you to dive in and let me know if there's a problem you're trying to solve right now. Because I'd like us to work together in the chat to see if we can go through the design thinking framework and start to create kind of an actionable answer to a problem. And again, I'll wait for everybody to type in and we'll see who's got the bravery and the courage to put out a problem that they're actually trying to manage right now. And it can be a simple problem or a more complicated problem. We'll see how far we can get with it. And if anybody has any questions about this process or design thinking in general, feel free to include those in the Q&A as well. So nobody has any problems. Everybody's doing great. And I'll give everybody a few more minutes to type something in. Colin, awesome. Thank you so much for diving in. So, what you're talking about is creating a marketing grant that actually develops tourism, creates an asset, and makes applicants be a better tourism ambassador. Awesome. So let's think about this for a minute. And thank you so much for the other questions coming in. We will try to approach a few of these if we have time today. But I want to start with Collins. So, again, the problem that you want to solve is you want to create a marketing grant that develops tourism, creates potentially an asset, and also makes applicants a better tourism ambassador. So, the first thing we want to do is, and again, this is a little bit more of a like how to create something that you don't already have, right? And I still think the design thinking process can work for this. So I think the first thing to talk about, and Colin, feel free to feedback. And again, if anybody else has feedback about this, what is it that you've thought about so far, right? And I know this is a more detailed question, but what are the things that you already assumed? Do you know what the asset needs to be? Do you feel like the grant is there a grant that's already available, or are you trying to find something new? I'd love a little more detail on kind of what are the assumptions we've made about this situation so far. And I love this next question too. We'll talk about that in a minute. How do we ensure the audience we want to target is the one we get? All right, great. So some of the assumptions is that you all, and let me just see. And let me just really quick clarify. So are you all creating the grant or are you trying to get the grant? I just want to make sure I'm understanding before we dig in. It sounds like you guys are creating the grant, right? Okay, so the problem you want to solve is how to maybe make that grant stronger or better. I just want to make sure we've really got the problem clear. All right, perfect. So we basically want to take the grant that you have and we want to make it so that it actually helps develop tourism, creates a stronger asset, and makes applicants be a better tourism ambassador. Awesome. And so perfect. So some of the assumptions you've already made is a part of what needs to go into the grant is you'll need to facilitate people getting photos and videos and helping them with like their marketing assets in that way, right? I think also a little bit of the assumption would be that creating an asset, there has to maybe be something there. What does that mean about creating an asset? So again, if we're talking about just helping a business expand or a brand expand itself, so it becomes a stronger pillar of tourism, right? And then also we want them to be a better ambassador around tourism. So great. So we've already know, yes, we're going to have to create some marketing assets. Yes, we're probably going to have to help them maybe build their business up a little bit, right? I think those are strong assumptions that we should have. And I think maybe another assumption would be that people want to be a stronger tourism ambassador, right? So do they even understand what that means? I think that's going to be the question. So we've got some of those assumptions. So if we think, feel, and need this out, and again, please feel free to feedback if you have ideas about this, everyone else. But Colin, when we think about what the business that you're going to give this grant needs, let's go through the think, feel, and need really quick, right? So you can feel free to type that in. But I'm just going to start sharing a few things, ideas that I have. If we think about a business that needs a grant in order to advance their marketing and become a stronger pillar of tourism, I think one of the thoughts that they're going to have is probably that it's very time consuming to do marketing, that they might think that they don't really have the skills to do marketing in some ways, right? So all of that stuff is going to be a stressor for them when it comes to even accepting a grant like this, right? I think when it comes to feelings, a lot of businesses, certainly that I've worked with, there's kind of this feeling that marketing isn't very personal or very depthful, right? So sometimes people just feel like marketing is like fluff and there's not a lot of things that they want to that's very connective there. So we have to sort of bring them into the fold of understanding that marketing is really telling their story in some ways, right? I think also they might feel like if they get all of these assets and they get all of this support, how are they going to keep it going? They're going to be afraid that they can't keep everything moving if they get the grant and they're able to put some things in place. And then I think if we look just at the utilitarian need again, we're going to see that anybody who receives a grant like this, they're going to need to have clear structure around what they're supposed to deliver as part of the grant, right? So, what are the expectations of the outcomes, right? If they get all these assets and they get all these other cool things to help them, what is it that they're going to do as far as implementation? What does that look like? Is there already a process for that? I think they're also just going to need a lot of clarity on like how, how to be educated about what assets should be there. What is this marketing kit that comes out of the grant? What does that mean? Again, depending on their experience, they might need a lot of education around that stuff. So, again, if you have, Colin, any other thoughts on just the think, feel, and need, the folks that get this grant or could get this grant. Am I on base or is there things that are you think need to be added? And I'm just going to give you a minute to type in a response there. Yeah, and Seth, thank you so much for your comment, right? That there is a big gap between marketing and experience, right? Yeah, exactly. And I think this is where I have a theory, being in marketing all these years, that everything is marketing. I would actually like to get rid of marketing as a concept that stands by itself. And I would like to say everything is marketing. Your human resources, your visitor experience, your customer service, like literally everything we do in the world that we live in now in the modern world is marketing because everything we do affects the relationships that we're building. And so I think there's a shift that's coming down the road for how we perceive these things for sure. Colin, thanks. So I'm on base. Awesome. So, in just talking this out again, the first reframe that I see of the problem, which if we go back was originally how do we create a marketing grant that actually develops tourism, creates an asset, and makes applicants better tourism ambassadors? I feel like the reframe of the problem is really first and foremost about that we need to create a grant that basically supports business owners in these ways, right? Rather than the things that are going to come out of the grant, we want to reframe the problem around how the businesses themselves, the grant receivers, are going to be able to implement and structure and manage this for themselves, right? So I think that's the first reframe to me. It's just, can we talk about it from the receiver of the grant's perspective first? And then I think the other thing too in the reframe of the problem is we can maybe break things down into more specifics than that original problem, right? So maybe even having a few bullet points in the problem that say to create these assets, right? Or to build these particular outcomes, right? So how can we relate it to, again, what we think the grant receiver is going to experience in the process? How can we reframe the problem from their perspective? And then if we want to keep in that problem some of the things that are the outcomes, how do we be more specific about the outcomes? When we say develops tourism, what does that mean, right? When we say creates an asset, what does that mean? And so reframing that problem then is going to give us a much easier time to move into the create small experiments. And this is where I'm going to really suggest you could dive into this today, Colin, in some ways, is really to get in there and just start mapping out what it looks like to do the grants in different ways, right? If we think about the reframes, there's going to be a few different ways that I think you can present this grant and develop it. And it might be good to come up with 3 or 4 different possible kind of outlines of the grant and exactly what the outcomes are going to be with deliverables and expectations. And then that's a great time to get some feedback from other people, right? And to say, you might not be able to put it out there yet and observe. But I think one of the first things you can do is create some different versions, then sit with people, ask them their opinions, get some feedback about it, observe that, then come back in and kind of decide this is where we're going to start. Once you launch that grant, then over the next few years, you're going to observe and adapt, right? Because what you're going to be able to see is how the receivers of the grants respond, how it works, whether it benefits them, and what questions come up in that process. And then you're going to be able to come back and reframe everything again. So let me know if you have questions about that. But I feel like that was a great example of something really specific to dive into. And again, that's not as public facing at first, but I think we were able to pretty quickly start to get to the point where we can actually start outlining some things, right? Which is really awesome. And Laura, I just see your comment that you have a very robust grant program. And some of the things that help are to hold a workshop prior to opening the grant cycle that goes through the application process and guides everyone on what makes a good application and what's likely to get funded. So I love this comment, Laura. This is something we've done here in Asheville. There's an amazing gentleman that has done so much work to help all sorts of small businesses and nonprofits get into the grant cycles for our tourism development products. And so I 100% agree. This is a great thing that is definitely something that I think could be part of a design thinking process where you add in an event like this to help people. So I want to go back to another problem when we have time, and this is coming from the South Carolina Low Country. I don't know if that's you, Peach, but if it is, hello. And your problem was, how do we ensure the audience we want to target is the one that we get? And so if you're there, I'd love to tackle this one as well, just from a process perspective. I'm curious to know right now, what are your assumptions and how do you ensure this? Or do you have assumptions about why it's not happening? I'm curious to hear. Yeah, and that makes total sense. You want to get better at targeting visitors that'll really appreciate what the South Carolina Low Country has to offer. Absolutely. And you want people to treat your natural assets respectfully. Now, I'm up in Asheville. We get this so strongly. So again, are there certain things that you think are causing you to not be able to target people in the right way? Or what do you think sort of the obstacles are right now? So I'd love to just talk about, are there things we need to question in order to get to the core of what the issue might be? And again, I'll give you a few minutes to type, but please, anyone else, if you want to jump in and provide feedback, awesome. So you're assuming there's over tourism in nearby destinations, correct? And when, yeah, differentiating yourselves, right? You don't feel like, so again, these are sort of things that you feel are causing the issue, right? So you're not necessarily targeting the people that really appreciate what you have to offer. And so you feel like part of that is there's over tourism in other places that's causing an issue. You think that maybe you haven't differentiated yourselves as much. Awesome. So now I want us to think, and I want to throw out another assumption too. I think sometimes when we're targeting, there's, and I'll just throw this in as a seed of thought for everyone. One of the things I think in marketing we all have to do is we still often focus in on demographics, which I do think are so valuable and I never want to take away from that. But I just think in the current world that we're living in, we need to always combine demographics with psychographics. And so a lot of times we'll be looking at demographics when it comes to targeting issues, and we'll say, we feel like we're just not in the right space. We're not getting the right people. And I'm like, actually, what we need to think about is the psychographics of those demographics and dig into that a little bit more. So I'll just throw that out as another common assumption that I see in situations around this type of topic. So now, Peach, I'd love for you to just tell me, think, feel, and need. There's a few ways we can approach this. I think you could think about your existing visitors, the one you're getting that maybe you feel are not quite as well targeted. What do you think is going on with those people? Another exercise we could do is also the perfect visitor that you want for South Carolina Low Country. What do you think they need to think, feel, and need? right? Like when you're thinking about that perfect visitor, the right visitors, the ones that you want to attract. So I think it's interesting to take it from both sides, right? So are there people coming in maybe because of over tourism or because they don't know that much about the area? Is there a way to transform their thinking and feeling and needs into something that is a better fit for your region, right? There may be some people that can transform. They might not show up the right person, but you might be able to make them the right person if you were thinking about it that way, right? But then there's always going to be those perfect people that you're looking for. Yeah, and I see your comment about the group in Edisto. Yeah, it's there's it does not surprise me that people think your area is a haven for feels. I have felt that just driving through there. Right, exactly. So people are coming there. Let's just go through that think, feel, and need thing. They're coming there in a lot of ways because I think South Carolina Low Country is peaceful, right? They're visiting because they want to reconnect with nature. They're visiting because they want to unplug. They're thinking that they need a break. They're thinking that they need to disconnect from modern stuff, right? And like I said, they want to feel peaceful. They want to feel like they're in somewhere beautiful and that they can relax into where they really are with their feelings, right? I think you all have a very some of your outdoor areas have a very meditative, healing kind of energy around them, right? The land there. And then what do they need, right, in order to do that? So again, I like this because if we think about thinking and feeling, again, it works whether we're talking about attracting your ideal people or we're trying to transform the people that are coming that maybe don't quite understand why they're there. And I think if you can present different types of content and even think about when you're creating campaigns around the fact that we want people to either come there because they need peace, they want to relax, they want to connect, right? They want to maybe process, they want to have a real getaway, they want to have a retreat from the world, or maybe they didn't know they were coming for that, but that's what happens when they get there, right? I think the thinking and feeling piece could be really strong in developing some content like that. And then I think the need again becomes more utilitarian. So, what do we have to do to actually target these people and reach them in the right way? This is where I think we can question, are we in the right channels for these folks, right? Are we talking about the right topics? Sometimes I think in the destination world and in the tourism and hospitality world, we can get really focused on all the things that are already happening. So it's like we've got so many events, we've got so many attractions, we've got so many products and services and experiences that a lot of what we're projecting tends to be that. And we forget to work into that mix the story, right? About like why people are choosing these things, why people would want to show up for these things. So we have to make sure we don't forget that part of it. So again, I think reframing the problem, if we go back to your original sort of verbiage up there, right? How do we ensure the audience we want to target is the one we get? I think if you reframe the problem, it actually becomes how can we communicate clearly to people that the South Carolina Low Country is the perfect place to go when you need to reset, have time away, process, heal, whatever it is, right? That you can come up with your own bunch of words that describe what you think it is that people are really thinking and feeling and needing. But I feel like that's the reframe of the problem, right? To just get more specific and then to think about how you translate this into small experiments. And again, this means maybe you don't have time to redo all of your campaigns and go back and evaluate everything, but maybe there's one social media campaign that could be adjusted. Maybe there's one email marketing newsletter system you could use to start putting out this messaging and telling the story in a deeper way. Maybe there is one ad group in your set of ads where you could do some new photos or do some new graphics, write some new content, and put this into the messaging, right? So, again, this might be something that starts small, where you just start to test with content and see if people respond to it. And then over time, use that to build out bigger and bigger, larger strategic campaigns, right? So that eventually this becomes something that's really a focus of everything that you're doing because these are the people that are the right visitors for you, right? They're going to come in, they're going to appreciate, they're going to contribute in a way that is really useful. So, again, this is something I think that could start small and grow, or you could dive into the big, sort of more strategic part of it. And it just depends on where you're at in your time and resources and energy, right? So, let me know, do you feel like that's helpful again? And Colin, too, do you all see where I'm going with this? And anybody else who's listening, does this process make sense? Because again, my goal is for us to really have something that in the moment we can use, no matter how small or big something is, to really get the ball rolling and moving forward, right? And so that we end up in a more creative space, we end up in a more empathetic space, we end up in a space that I feel is often very energizing for me. And hopefully some of you feel that way too, which is to think about the people we serve. Whenever there's problems or issues, when I think about the people I care about, it makes working on it a lot easier. And I think that was my goal in developing some of this for myself and wanting to share it with everyone else. Like I said, in a world full of change, how do we make sure that change doesn't always create just more stress or more difficulty? How can we enter a mindset of creativity and caring for others that allows us to see solving a problem as something that can be even exciting and innovative? Yeah, and Peach, I really feel you. It's hard to focus when the small fires keep you distracted and we're all overstimulated and we're all looking at a million things all day. And a lot of those things are stressful, right? So I don't know about the rest of you, but no matter how zen I feel, what's happening in the world around me is just always going to be impacting me. And as humans, this is the most contact through technology that we've ever had with everything happening on the planet at once. So sometimes we have to remember too that our neurosystems throughout our body, we have not even really fully adapted to how quickly our technology has introduced all of the things happening in the world into our minds all at once. So that's where hopefully, like I said, this helps solve the issue that you're talking about, Peach, right? Which is sometimes there's all these small fires, there's all these things that have to get handled, there's all these things that need to be done. We don't have hours to sit and kind of go through a process. Again, design thinking, there's lots of things you can do to extend the process. You could take a week retreat and do a design thinking process, right? But I wanted to share with you something that's really helped me be in the moment, be grounded, and actually find solutions to things. And a lot of this came out of my work as a social media manager for so many years, because social media is really developing a sort of habit of being, I would say, an information junkie, number one, and somebody who's always responding and is always like paying attention to notifications. That sort of work can easily become very stressful. And I really had to find ways to be creative, to be innovative with my clients, to help them accomplish their goals, and know that it might not be that I had a whole day to sit with it, right? So this is something that really helped me. And I hope that it really helps all of you as well. So I know we're coming right up to the end. I want to make sure there's no other questions specifically about how to implement this. And Karen, I see your question. You're trying to drive more visitors into your visitor center. Feel free to email me if you use this framework. And I'm glad to just feedback with you about it, because I think that's another great question that could be put into this framework easily. And you could start to really figure out, especially with that think, feel, need, figure out what it is that the people need to feel motivated and inspired to go to the visitor center. I was just in Ireland and Scotland, and I will just say my work with visitor centers made me so delighted to go into so many of them in these small rural areas that I drove through. So there's such value and there's so much storytelling there. But again, if you want to continue your learning, I've put in the link in this slide deck for IDEO and the Stanford School of Design Thinking. They offer lots of free content that you can explore. Also, if you were going to Google or talk to AI about something, human-centered design, journey mapping, agile rapid prototyping, lean experimentation, empathy mapping, all of these things are related to the design thinking process in some way. And I think they have great value. Like I said, rapid prototyping, as a social media manager, I feel like rapid prototyping, when I studied that in 2013, it changed my life because I was feeling very burnt out. And I went from like taking myself out of a burnout and back into my passion because of that concept. So I really invite all of you, you don't have to be a designer, you don't have to be an engineer. These structured ways of thinking and these mindsets, these frameworks for taking action and fueling your creativity while you're addressing different issues, I think are really available to everyone. And you can apply them to so many different parts of your work. And dare I say, so many parts of your personal life as well. So, design thinking isn't just for graphics or websites, it enhances every experience that you want to create. And at the end of the day, I think as we go forward, we're really going to be learning the world is ever changing. And the number one thing that matters is the kind of experience people are having, right? Change can be positive and negative, and a lot of that comes down to perception. And the perception of that change is often baked into the experience. So, for all of us that are working in tourism, travel, hospitality, really, I think just embracing this new way of looking at things and being open to how we problem solve together is really valuable to create more communal things that we can share and do together to achieve results. So, top of the hour, I'm going to let you all go. You will receive the recording and the slide deck on Friday when I send it out to everyone as usual. And if you would like to get that slide deck right now to work with the framework, you can scan this QR code. If you will just tell me what you thought about this presentation, this is a topic I haven't really covered because it's more of a nerdy personal passion, but I'd love to hear what you thought about it. If you thought it was useful, if there was anything I could have done better. If you complete that survey, you will get my slide deck right now and you'll be able to take that framework and implement it. But I really appreciate you all being here. You will get an invite to our next webinar in June, which I'm really excited about. It's going to be on heritage and history and cultural tourism, and we're going to have a great special guest. But again, thank you all so much for joining me. One of my favorite things every month is to get to connect with people across the world in our industry and to share ideas. I really appreciate the feedback, the problems, the questions that came up in the chat. And again, my email is in the slide deck. You will get it directly. If you would like to talk about this at all in the future, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always down for a virtual coffee. But again, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day. And I hope to see you again at a future Learn Tourism Talks webinar.